Bueno, de este panel va a participar Paul Veradittakit de Pantera Capital. Paul is currently Vice President at Pantera Capital and focuses on the firm's venture investments. Since joining in 2014, Paul has helped to launch the firm's second venture fund and has executed 11 investments. Paul is also mentor at Boot VC and at Golden Gate Ventures, an accelerator in Singapore. Michael Terpin, he has been introduced before also, but co-founder of BitAngels, the first angel network for virtual currency startups, also founder of Social Radios, a social media marketing firm specializing in social networks and platforms and viral marketing. Trace Mayer, yes, you're him. Trace is an entrepreneur, investor, journalist, and monetary scientist who is also a leading expert on the Bitcoin and gold with regular media appearances. He has presented on Bitcoin to a wide variety of audiences, including members of the Federal Reserve, Bundesbank, major financial institutions such as IRS, FBI, and FTC. And Erik Voorhees, founder and CEO of Shapeshift, Instant Bitcoin, and Altcoin Exchange. He is co-founder of the Bitcoin community, of the Bitcoin company Coinapult, and works as director of marketing at BitInstant. Advocate of the separation of money and state, Erik has been an active and known member of the Bitcoin community for the past years. Thank you for joining the panel. And our moderator will be Justin Blincoe, who will introduce himself.
Thank you, Rodolfo. So my name is Justin Blincoe, and I am the host of Liberty Entrepreneurs Podcast. Thanks, Trace. So I wanted to start out with one question to each individual, and then we'll get into more of a panel discussion. Trace, I'd like to start with you. So startups need to show potential for positive ROI for a VC to be interested in them. What can international startups do to look attractive? What things should they start out with to provide that future potential?
Yeah, so I suppose I've been helping shape some of the discussion for Bitcoin as a whole. Like, why do we hire Bitcoin? Like, what good or service? Like, why do we hire it? Like, what's it going to do for us? And the startups that I've funded, Armory, it's a wallet, you secure your Bitcoins. BitPay, it's a merchant processor, so people can spend their Bitcoins. And Kraken, it's an exchange where you can trade your Bitcoins back and forth. So you need to look at, I think Latin America is very ripe for reasons for people to hire Bitcoin. You might need to move capital in and out of Argentina or Venezuela, like import-export businesses. And finding proofs of concept that people will pay for would also be a way to determine that. Because a lot of people want to just work on science projects because it's fun, but I think we're past that stage of Bitcoin's development, and we need to be focused on profitable business models, and that's what people will pay for to hire it.
Right. Thanks, Trace. Paul, so you wrote an article called "How Bitcoin is Going to Disrupt Cross-Border Payments." Obviously, when a U.S. VC is investing in companies abroad, there's cross-border payments involved. How has that affected, VCs investing in global companies? Do the payments of the actual investment and then later potential payments back disrupt or hurt that ecosystem?
Yeah, just to expand a little bit on what Trace was saying, for us in Pantera Capital, we're a large venture capital firm focused exclusively on this ecosystem, and we invest into companies globally. In terms of what we want to invest into, outside of just, how do you get Bitcoin, how do you store them, those are needed for all the geographies that, want to work with Bitcoin. There needs to be liquidity and whatnot, but, we look for use cases, people that are trying to solve problems in their certain geographies. And, they're early on, there were just a lot of people that were just, this is a cool technology, we want financial freedom, we just want to tinker around and create cool products, but they weren't really actually going after problems to solve, and now we're actually seeing some of those problems that they're trying to solve. And I think one of the biggest things that Bitcoin can provide a lot of value to people is moving money across borders where there are fees, there are friction, there are banks in between, correspondent banks that have incentives to make this process more complicated and more, and make it take a lot more time so they can get, interest off of money that they hold, et cetera, et cetera. So, for us, we see a lot of potential in that. And, we invest into Align Commerce, which recently announced their Series A with Kleiner Perkins and Silicon Valley Bank. And they're going to be a global cross-border payment company working with exchanges and banks. So basically, the trend with cross-border payments is, at the end of the day, people don't need to know that they're using Bitcoin, whether they're consumers or, in this case, businesses. They just need to know that we're able to move money similar to the way that we're used to in terms of using fiat, but we're able to use Bitcoin as a technology, as a payment rail, where at the end of the day, what people care about is faster, cheaper. So,
for those that don't know, what's the difference between a remittance and a cross-border payment?
Yeah, for us, I mean, I would say remittances. We consider remittances to be consumer to consumer, and we consider cross-border payments to be business to business. Now, what Align Commerce is focusing on is a sector of business to business, small and medium businesses. So replacing international wires anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000. That's kind of the area, the pain point where relationships with bank aren't as strong, and banks have more incentives to take more fees. So I think it's estimated about $50 billion of fees happen in international cross-border wires. So Align Commerce is hoping to reduce that by charging 1.9%.
Thanks, Paul. Michael, you're a co-founder of BitAngels. When throughout the evolution, because it's been around, it was one of the earlier funds that's investing in this space, how has your global strategy evolved over that time?
Sure. So we've really been global right from the very beginning, but it definitely has evolved over time. I started BitAngels in May of 2013 when I met David Johnston at the first Bitcoin Foundation conference. And at that conference, that was really the first Bitcoin conference that had more than maybe 100 people. It wasn't just a handful of techies and libertarians exchanging code. And there was 1,000 people, which at that point seemed just like, oh my God, we're like just taking over. That's where Eric and I have talked about this too. It's where a lot of people made sort of their first relationships, impacts with other people in the world, because it really was sort of a global conference. And I also noticed that there were people I knew from Brazil who had come to San Jose just for that conference. People who I had known from the .com era who had made money there, and all of a sudden were getting into Bitcoin. I was like, okay, these are really smart people who were in 93, 94 in Bitcoin. There must be something similar happening here. And then when I saw that, two big funds, Union Square Ventures wrote a check for $5 million for Coinbase. When at the conference they had a 10-foot table with the CEO handing out T-shirts out front. That's how early they were, and Andreessen Horowitz put $2 million into Ripple. I was like, it's interesting that there's VCs involved and there's not really a known angel community. And so David and I basically put a note up on, we just sort of started as a cocktail conversation. We just sort of dared each other. It's like, we should have an angel group. Great, let's do it. Okay, let's call it BitAngels. Okay, great, let's have a meeting tomorrow. We'll put a note on Reddit. We were hoping 5 or 6 people would show up. We had 35 show up, including Roger Ver and Vinny Lingam and Jared Kenna and some of the top angels, and by the end of the week we had 60 angels and we're off and running. And some of the very earliest companies that we had talked to were in Latin America, because we were looking at where are the real pain points. We had about 20 companies that we did presentations for in the first half a year that we did that, and about 10 of them got checks. So it's really a decentralized group where you go and present, and we also present at different conferences around the world, and we'll partner with a conference. We had a BitAngels conference the last 2 years as well. and then the individual angels will make their own deal. So that's similar to what other technology sort of angel groups are in the rest of the world. They're really more of a social group that then the due diligence is shared, and then the angels do the individual investments. Since then, I also started with Gil Pinchina, the Bitcoin syndicate on AngelList, and we did 5 deals there. But I've also found that to be a little bit challenging in that, for example, I invested in Erik's company, Shapeshift, and they didn't want us to put it on AngelList for a few reasons, including because it was incorporated in Switzerland, and they only want U.S. companies, and so. We did a BitAngels fund that was now called the DApps Fund, which was investing just in decentralized applications. We raised about $6 million for that, and I'm in the process right now, hoping to announce it in January or February of next year of closing on or at least announcing a BitAngels seed fund that will be global in nature.
Thanks, Michael. Erik, you have founded a number of companies, and they've started in a number of different tax farms. What advice would you give to people that are starting companies, thinking about starting companies, about where they locate their company and what their thought process should be when they're doing that? If you can answer that in Spanish, that'd be great.
Okay, so I got into Bitcoin to change things. And by things, I don't just mean the price of sending a transaction to someone in another country and bringing that down by 1%. I got into Bitcoin to really change how society worked. And it's impossible to do that without pushing on boundaries of politics, of economics. And so the businesses I've tended to get involved in, to a lesser or greater extent, tend to push these boundaries. And so that means when I am building them, I need to think about the jurisdiction that they are based in. A lot of people sort of build a company where they are, even though it's an internet company, and they don't perhaps realize that when you're building an internet company, your business is on the internet. Like, that's where the company is. That's the domicile of that business. The fact that for legacy reasons, sometimes you need to incorporate in a certain geographic area, which in the future will look very silly, but which today is commonplace, means you should think that you're on the internet first, and where you put the actual domicile of the company from a corporate perspective can be an important concern after that. So Satoshi Dice was not a company at all. It didn't have a jurisdiction other than the internet itself. Coinapult was in Panama, BitInstant was in New York, and Shapeshift is in Switzerland. And one of the things I've learned about these jurisdictions is that while the jurisdiction that you're incorporated in is important, what's often more important is where your customers are. So there's sort of this myth, I think, that a lot of people have, that if you're based in company A or in country A, only the laws of country A apply to you. And it's not true. The laws of the countries where your customers are, that's what's really more important. So if you guys saw the news about Variety Jones, who got picked up in Thailand, he was involved in the Silk Road, allegedly. He was a Canadian who was in Vietnam and was picked up by Americans for running Silk Road, which was obviously not an American company. So how do they have jurisdiction over that? Well, they shouldn't, but they claim that they do because some Silk Road customers were probably Americans. It depends much more where your customers are than where your company is based. So give a lot of thought to where you set up. Give a lot of thought to where your customers are, and in many cases it makes sense to block certain jurisdictions. I'm encouraging absolutely everyone in this industry to block New York. We were and I will say that again. I encourage every company in this industry to block New York. Not because it's necessarily a good financial decision, because there are a lot of customers in New York, a lot of investors in New York, but because it is a good moral decision to push this industry forward, to show that we will not just cow down to whatever a bunch of politically elected or unelected individuals tell us to do. A lot of what we're doing in this industry is to push humanity forward, and I think a good way to do that, at the very least, is to say, New York, you guys way overstepped your bounds. We're going to block you, and we're going to explain why we've blocked you. So Shapeshift blocked New York long time ago, and we wrote about how and why we did that at our site, pleaseprotectconsumers.org. So any of you who are interested in that initiative, go to that site and check it out. And I'll end with that.
Thanks, Eric. Good advice. Now I want to open up, instead of specific questions, more to the entire group. We heard a little bit about this from Mr. Terpin, but as you gentlemen are thinking about investing in projects across the world, what's the strategy that you use for thinking about, where how you allocate that portfolio, whether you have a board or whether it's yourself doing it? Right now, I think 73% of the billion that have been invested in Bitcoin has been in the U.S. A lot of the money comes from the U.S. For investing, but how are you thinking about beyond the borders and yeah?
I mean, for us, going back to looking at use cases, right? We have made bets in Africa, we made bets in Philippines, we made bets in India, we made bets in what else? Korea. So we look at and Argentina too. So we look at companies that are domiciled in certain jurisdictions where we feel that there's certain use cases that should evolve with the use of Bitcoin, such as the economy, inflation, currency, capital controls, remittances is probably, in terms of consumer-to-consumer cross-border payments, we think is a potential huge use case. So, that explains why we've made investments into some of those jurisdictions. In terms of, how we like to invest, a lot of funds in the United States, Silicon Valley, don't want to invest globally because, it's hard to maintain relationships, even though we have Skype and whatnot. But to be able to be very hands-on with these companies, it is very hard, and a lot of these companies need certain relationships and certain hand-holding that are specific to their environment. So for us, when we're making an investment, we like to partner with local investors, whether they are groups of angel investors or local VCs, so that we can have a little bit more access to to the company, and to be able to have them have relationships and value add that we may not be able to provide, and some oversight that we can't be able to provide. But I think what's important to look at when you're looking at different geographies is of course the team. Team is important to be able to build a company, to be able to hire, but also in a lot of these markets that are very nascent, the teams will have to do a lot of education, and will have to do a lot of work in terms of navigating regulations. So having people that are professional enough to be able to deal with the central bank or lawyers and regulators, I think is extremely important, and to be able to really just have some experience to be able to navigate some of these things, I think is huge. And I think the second thing that we look at is their understanding of the market, and certain geographies, mobile is more important than others, and certain use cases that they should be tackling. So I think those are some of the things that come to my mind in terms of really, is this company something that, one that we want to dive deeper into.
You mentioned being able to interface with central banks, and obviously a big term in Bitcoin and thought is compliance. While it's probably difficult to shut down the Bitcoin network from a regulatory perspective, it's not hard to shut down a business. And if you're invested in that business, as investors, what due diligence do you have to do to make sure that your company is somewhat compliant? What risks do you face if you don't do that? And how should entrepreneurs be preparing themselves before they talk to investors?
Yeah, so I guess I've made investments in two of them, both BitPay and Kraken. And our original investment in BitPay was, early 2012. And in the United States, under Section 1860, if you own all or part of an unlicensed money transmission business, you can go to jail for 5 years. And at the time, we didn't know whether they were going to round up everybody in Bitcoin and throw them in jail or not. And so just the whole industry is very disruptive. You never know what the U.S. will do. If you think it's a rogue elephant right now, just wait till it's truly panicked economically and financially and monetarily. So my approach has been, we need to be very practical. We need to interact with regulators, law enforcement. We're all on this tiny blue planet together until the U.S. goes Russia into nuclear war or something, right? And so, how do we do that? And especially, so now we have the FinCEN guidance, and they actually use this Section 1860 to prosecute somebody who was collecting cash in Chile to make remittances, and it's the Mazda case, and the guy in Chile is in jail now. So, they're applying these laws. And so, at least, at Kraken, we've hired the former chief AML guy from Visa. And at Kraken, we've hired a chief compliance officer from Merrimain Capital, who's also a New York attorney. So if you work with, as opposed to against, the regulators, and they're applying arbitrary law, and you're helping them catch the bad guys, and there really are bad guys, like in the Bitcoin community, whether they commit securities fraud or some of these other things that transgress natural rights. If you're working with, not against them, then they're going to help us shape the law, and we're going to help them shape the law, because we're moving into an area where the law is unclear, and we need to, if we're just going to rage against them and fight against them, well, they're going to take you and put you in a cage, which they've done with Mr. Albrecht, which they've done with Charlie Shrem, which they've done with several other people. So, I think it's important that we look at our use cases for how our companies are using Bitcoin, and then try to fit it into a box, make good faith attempts to be compliant with law where we can, and where it's unsettled or they need help or something, we can step in and attempt to educate them or otherwise do that type of stuff. And on their side, they understand that they need our help. This is a new technological innovation. We understand it. They don't. They need our help understanding it. If they run the industry out of New York and, Kraken, for example, we've blocked New York because it doesn't make sense from an ROI perspective to serve them. We would serve the customers there if those customers were willing to pay for those regulatory compliance costs, but they're not, so we don't serve them. Where's the industry go? Well, it goes to London, it goes to Singapore, it goes to Shanghai, it comes down to Panama. And that's one thing that I think is very exciting about Bitcoin is anytime they do put this regulatory, they try to trammel it with regulation, it really just opens up entrepreneurial opportunity and profitability for people to not work in compliance with law, which is one thing that's frustrating as a VC, because I'm not going to invest in the company that sells Bitcoins illicitly in New York. But the companies that sell Bitcoin illicitly in New York, some of them are making $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a day of net income. And they get to make that net income because the regulation makes it more profitable. And so, the regulators understand this. They understand that if they want to catch the bad guys, they're going to need help from the industry and community. And so we get to work with each other in hopefully coming out with regulation that serves society as a whole and helps us push innovation forward. Otherwise, the industry goes to some other country.
Thanks, Trace.
Can I jump in real quick on that one? I think that this term working with regulators is often a euphemism for doing whatever regulators say. And often regulators are wrong. Often they have bad rules, bad laws, sometimes bad intentions, but I think often good intentions. And so what I like to tell people is not necessarily to work with regulators, because they don't really work with people. They force people to do what they want them to do. But to work toward the regulators' intentions or goals, some of which are very good, right? Some of the goals of regulators are very good. Some of them are preventing fraud. Some of them are preventing money from going to bad people. Some of these are very good ideas, and to the extent that they can be met without violating other people's rights, I think that's a positive step forward. So for example, with Shapeshift, one of the things we have sort of two facets that I think align very well with regulators' goals. One of them is that we are the most transparent exchange of any exchange on the planet, in that every single transaction that goes through our platform is published on the website. No other exchange, no other marketplace in the world does that, to my knowledge. And I think that's a huge step forward for financial transparency, and a regulator with good intentions should applaud such a thing. Second, the challenge of custodianship, or the goxing that happened where everyone's money was gone, the regulators like to look at that and say, we need more rules in order to specify how you can have custodianship. Well, at Shapeshift, we got rid of custodianship entirely. So we met the regulator's goal by designing something that was better, not by working with them, but by just building something that was superior. I think that should be the mentality of people in this industry, is to build toward the virtuous goals of these regulators, show them that technology and entrepreneurship and innovation can seek out and meet and match the things that they actually want, while not violating the rights that often their regulations do.
Great points, Eric. We have about 15 minutes left on this panel, and I want to invite the audience to ask questions. Obviously, everyone here is not living in Mexico, and we're here in a Mexican conference, so hoping to localize the conversation a little bit more from the higher level, if anyone wants to.
Okay, this time I will allow Arya to.
So my question is not specific to Mexico, but I think it might be very relevant to entrepreneurs around Latin America. But it's also just for the ecosystem in general. I think that some of the most exciting projects are open source, and I think that some of the most important aspects of the ecosystem, the trustless aspect of it, the permissionless aspect of it, require open source. But open source business models are notoriously hard. So what advice would you guys give to open source projects or people who want to build something in a permissionless way that is still attractive to investors?
Well, real quick, one really good example of a company I think that's done this amazingly is BitPay. They have their normal business, and I think they have plenty of proprietary software, and they charge a fee for their services on many things. They also have funded and contributed to this huge area of open source development with Copay and Insight. A lot of those tools that they're helping to build, many of which are useful in their products, they open source those. So it doesn't always have to be an all or nothing proposition, I think is a good way to think about it.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I would also just say that there are a lot of very innovative ways of having open source that still has, and this is in the dApp space in particular, where you still have, say, a crowd sale that comes out of, say, the Genesis block, and then has mining afterwards, or that you have certain things that are open source but have various token properties can be built on top of it. And that's still for the 1% of Bitcoin holders who are still 1% or less of the general population. And we'll find other new entrepreneurial ways of achieving both goals as we go forward. If you look at the way the internet has evolved, where you have stacks, you still have a free and open internet, but then you have parties that come and go by them being good corporate citizens, and you can debate whether Facebook's a good corporate citizen or whether Amazon's a good corporate citizen or whether Google is, but they have gone and benefited by the free internet, and they have built gigantic profitable businesses on top of them.
Yeah, I suppose I'd just add that the information age and the complexity of our economy is increasing, and what we're finding is that economic capital is not necessarily as important as the human capital. And so, invest in yourself, like accumulate your own capital so that you can self-fund your own projects. Like, you don't need to go get money from VCs. In fact, it'd be better if you don't, because they're going to want to have control over your businesses and voting rights and stuff like that, which they very well should because they're putting up their money. So figure out a way to do it where you don't need their money. And I think, and we have such force multiplying tools now in the information age that somebody with an idea can combine 3 different pieces together and create a $6 billion project. just because he puts something clever together, puts some numbers and words together cleverly, which is exactly what Satoshi did. So, we don't necessarily need. I think, our whole way of organizing corporations and venture capital and all of this is just going to be massively disrupted and changed as we move further into the information age.
I would just add one thing quickly to the comment about VCs. Capital is not a one-size-fits-all, so an angel is typically going to be having a lot less and demanding a lot less rights than, say, Kleiner Perkins. And syndicates are typically groups of angels, and you typically will grow in different areas. And by the time you get to the point where you feel you need a traditional venture capital firm, you usually are at the point where you can handle sort of those additional compliance levels. You don't want to go to a big venture capital firm with your seed round.
I have a question for the panel. Specifically, your views on Latin America. Are you looking actively for investments in the region? Are you looking to expand your portfolio companies in the region? What's your view on the potential of Latin America?
Yeah, I'm definitely, we're invested into Bitpagos, so we've made an early bet already in Latin America. We're excited about what they're doing in Argentina, of course, in other countries as well. We believe that the initial use case of the store of value in Argentina was, pretty compelling, and we just really like the team over there. In terms of other geographies that we're looking at in Latin America, very interested in Mexico and very interested in Brazil. For us, we are doing seed and Series A investments. Seed and Series A depends on what type of company it is. If it's more of a technology company, we may make an earlier bet. If it's more of a consumer company, we may wait a little bit to see if there's traction, understand the traction, and then of course see the competitive landscape to see if there's one company that's kind of breaking out versus the other. Because as a venture capital firm versus a seed fund, we're trying to make a concentrated bet into one company in a certain geography, in a certain space within that geography. So, no point in making a bet too early and getting it wrong. So for us, we're still looking very deeply into countries like Mexico and Brazil and evaluating, when is the right time to make a bet versus, in terms of like what companies we are seeing that are making a breakout into certain use cases that we find that are compelling.
Yeah, I'd kind of echo that. It's important to do it first, but I think more importantly is to do it right. We need to do it right and then do it first. And with like Kraken or BitPay, we can kind of move in here. We've got 2 offices with BitPay in Argentina, so we're already putting tentacles down into South America. And so if there are any strategic partnerships or things like that, I think that's a way to approach growing the ecosystem down here more than making a seed investment, just wiring money to Colombia or something. Like, it's scary as an investor.
And at Bit Angels, we over the 3 years had at least a dozen and a half presentations from Latin American companies, and I think there were 3 or 4 that got at least some form of funding, even if it was $25,000 or $50,000 from some of the members. But I would say that what I'm looking for, what I think most investors are looking for, is sort of a combination. Number one, Reid Hoffman, founder and CEO of former CEO, then not CEO, now CEO again, of LinkedIn, has a recent book out where he's talking about how important it is not to be the first mover, but to be the first to scale. So I always look for that. Are you the first one to really take something, and even if you're the 4th or 5th in, to just like really put rocket fuel on it? One company that I invested in recently is Purse.io. And Roger Vera invested in as well. Our syndicate, we sold out our allotment, and I look and I say, okay, here's a company that is doing 40%, month over month growth in sales. Shapeshift has similar, if not better, numbers. I like any company that says I'm doing double-digit growth per month. I want to hear the rest of that story. And so, and then you can get into things whether you're sort of just a faster, better, cheaper way of doing things, or whether you're really sort of like a blue sky solution where you're either going to fail in a huge fireball or you're going to be a 100x. And usually you want one or two of those in your portfolio, but not the majority. The majority are going to be just a better, faster way of doing it. Like Purse, like Shapeshift, and like a number of other companies that I think are just great companies out there right now.
Thanks. Tor?
Hi guys. I have a question about your ideas on risk management and diversification when investing in space. And maybe more particular, what are your thoughts about right now, what would be a healthy balance between investing in Bitcoin, the currency, and investing in the companies, the ecosystem?
I think anyone who is investing in the Bitcoin industry and doesn't own some Bitcoin doesn't know what the hell they're doing. This industry has a very unique and amazing attribute which has helped it bootstrap and helped it grow, which is that everyone that's participating that owns a Bitcoin has a share in the entire industry. And not only does it help the investors to profit in a more diversified way, but it actually makes all the companies that are in this space friends, just naturally. So I think that's really important. You should always have some Bitcoin, and how you diversify beyond that, I think, is going to be a different question.
Yeah, and I echo, Erik's statement that I think there's a lot of upside to owning Bitcoin, and especially if you're involved in the ecosystem, I think it's a prerequisite. I mean, just have a little Bitcoin. It incentivizes you to learn a little bit more about it, to use it, to understand it. I think that's something that everyone should do. For us at Pantera, I mean, we really echo what Erik says about owning Bitcoin, using Bitcoin really helps fuel all of the companies in the ecosystem. So for us, even traveling to this conference right here, we use Expedia. We use Expedia for everything that we can use it for. We use Purse.io to get all of our office supplies. So it helps the ecosystem. It helps investors really understand how compelling these products are and what the value proposition is. So go buy some Bitcoin.
Yeah, I kind of look at it like, investing in gold versus the gold mining companies, and they occupy completely different parts in a portfolio. The gold is a very safe, liquid asset. The mining companies are very speculative. I have a friend, he's got a website that calculates all your capital gains from your Bitcoin trading, and so in order to do that, he's got integrations with a bunch of exchanges. He's got 4 times as many exchanges that have failed than he has currently operating and integrated in the thing. The number of dead companies in this industry is already in the thousands, probably. Of course, they don't have booths at the conferences, right? And I think another good thing is we've been in a 2-year bear market. I think that's very good. It weeds out the less competent operators. It helps reorder the factors of production. Then get them into better, safer, more stable hands, better operators, and then we can move forward with the next bull market or uptrend. And we're going to have cycles like that. And I started publicly talking about Bitcoin at a nickel. I've seen every cycle, and we're going to continue to have cycles. And those cycles are good because it brings in new waves of customers and consumers. And so, we need to, if you're looking at investing in the companies, realize Bitcoin's not where it's today is not where it's going to be in 5 or 10 years. And if you're funding a company that really is going to have its use case in 5 or 10 years, like, why are you funding it today? Like, you shouldn't fund it today, So, because it's going to run out of cash, it's not going to get customers, and then you're going to have to sell its assets off to someone else who's going to take it and run with it. So, you have to be very kind of judicious with it, and also keep in mind, like, you're probably better off holding Bitcoin than holding equity in a lot of these Bitcoin companies. So, if we're looking at the risk-free rate of return, you got to start factoring that into account also. Like, it's going to be hard to get capital out of investors, I think, going forward. And we've also seen just tons of vaporware from people in the space. You know, and people take their venture funding or their seed funding and they go get drunk with it instead of like building something. Well, guess what? Now you get to build something on your own.
All right. Well, we've just about run out of time. Oh, Michael, you want to
add a quick thing to that? There's synergistic investments. They're not quite the way with gold and a gold mine because obviously there's all sorts of different aspects of crypto investment. But you know, I'm about 80-20 Bitcoin and other altcoins to companies. Because you look and you know, I'm also obviously able to leverage sort of the personal money that I put in through syndicates and funds. But if you look at the overall synergy, if Bitcoin fails completely, most of those companies are going to fail. So even if it's only a 10 or 20% chance. Although I will say that after this 2-year bear market, the average company that I talked to is much stronger than any other time that I've talked to companies because it has really weeded out the sort of like, you know, people like you had at the top of the .com. I'm going to do an IPO. What are you going to do? I don't know. I'm going to call it something.com, you know. So same thing for a while when Bitcoin was $1,000 a share, people just had vague ideas and were writing business plans without really knowing what they were talking about. And that's not really happening right now. But no, I think that you know, right now you have to look, and when you're looking at a company you're going to invest in, if you're on that side, you have to look and say, is this a company that I think I can make 30 or 40 or 50 times my money? Because if you're investing in say 10 or 20 companies, which an angel should over a portfolio, you got to figure that like 80% of them are going to fail, and so the ones that survive are going to, you know, need to do 30, 40, 50x. At least 1 or 2 of them, so that you're able to get, you know, what a good goal for a early stage fund is that's successful is 20 to 30% what they call IRR per year, which means you might get a 10 or 15x over 5 years. And then look and say at 375, do I think Bitcoin is going to be worth more than $5,000 in the year 2020? If you're more confident of that than of your ability to pick individual stocks or of the fund that your ability of thinking of how are they going to find those things, then pick Bitcoin. If you're sort of on the cusp and you want to hedge the bets, do both.
Thanks, Michael. So I wanted to finish off. A few people mentioned the network. So I remember Paul mentioned that, you know, they like to invest with local investors. Silicon Valley has so much investment because everyone can go and have coffee with you know, their founders and really develop relationships. Out in the rest of the world, it's more difficult to do that, but everyone here in this room that's here at this conference is starting to do that outside of that Silicon Valley bubble. So I'd really recommend that everyone you know, network as much as possible, meet your friends, because a lot of the people that are starting companies now are going to be the successful ones that are, you know, venture capitalists and angels in 3, 5, 10 years. So do what you can now to develop those relationships while everyone's here in one place, and then spread that throughout the world. And thanks to the organizers of the 3rd annual for creating this forum where we can start to do that. So with that.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all, yes, for joining us. It's a real pleasure to have you here. Bueno, estamos llegando básicamente al corte, ¿sí? Antes del corte les queríamos mostrar, we wanted to show you the stats about the Bitcoin comic book, yes, what has been done till now. Este proyecto, ¿sí? Que lo llamamos el Multi-Signature Project, ¿sí? Ya tiene más de 105 firmas, se superamos, deberíamos hablando de, cuando empezamos a escribirlo, empezamos la conferencia hace un mes a armarle un poco el tema de la web, eran 80. ¿Sí?